What's up, guys? You've probably seen what's going on with the Timberwolves, right?
Glen Taylor is no longer selling the team.
I'll just continue to keep the ownership.
Well, after owner Glen Taylor said the team was no longer for sale when incoming owners Alex Rodriguez and Marc Lore missed a payment that would have given them majority control of the franchise, I decided to dive in. Something just didn't seem right. Over the last few weeks, I've uncovered many exclusive details. These details were provided to me through conversations with people directly involved in the situations. I'm talking about NBA executives, Timberwolves employees, sports bankers, lawyers, and many others. These people were granted anonymity so they could speak freely, and my only goal was to investigate what has become one of the NBA's most interesting storylines. So today's post will be broken into several sections. First, we'll talk through Glen Taylor's history in the NBA, including how the initial sale went and why he spurned multiple cash offers to do a deal with Rodriguez and Lore instead. Then, we'll dig into what has happened over the past few years, including Tim Connelly's unique contract and a financial transformation within the franchise. And lastly, we'll discuss potential outcomes, mainly professional legal opinions that I have vetted through multiple sports lawyers who have conducted dozens of sports team sales. This video required a lot of time and effort, so if you enjoy it, please subscribe to the channel. But without further ado, let's get right into it. Glen Taylor's NBA resume is as complex as it is long. In 1994, the former Minnesota Senator purchased the Timberwolves for $88 million. Initially, fans loved Taylor, mainly because the purchase stopped the franchise from relocating to New Orleans. However, the honeymoon phase didn't last long. It's now widely accepted amongst NBA insiders and Timberwolves fans that Taylor is amongst the worst owners in sports. It started when Taylor was suspended in 2000 by the NBA for his role in signing Joe Smith to a secret contract in violation of the league's salary cap rules. Then Commissioner David Stern called it one of the farthest reaching frauds I've ever seen. And it cost the Timberwolves $3.5 million in cash and 3 future draft picks. There have been countless other problems too, like when former Timberwolves general manager Kevin McHale sued Taylor for allegedly sabotaging the value of a medical device company McHale invested in. And we all know about Kevin Garnett, a franchise legend, who has refused to participate in a jersey retirement ceremony or even speak with Taylor after a deal for him to join the Timberwolves management upon retirement fell through, with Garnett later saying, "I don't do business with snakes." So when rumors kept popping up over the last decade that Taylor was interested in selling the team, most fans were thrilled. Taylor's 83 years old and not getting any younger. No one in his family is taking over the team, and given the franchise hasn't won a playoff series in more than 20 years, new ownership was seen as a breath of fresh air. The only problem is that these discussions never escalated to a sale. For example, multiple sources tell me that Taylor has engaged with a handful of interested parties over the last decade, only for talks to fall apart when Taylor had to sign on the dotted line. Some of these negotiations have already been reported, like when Taylor tried to sell the Timberwolves to minority owners of the Memphis Grizzlies. However, sources tell me this has happened several other times too. And these deals weren't reported because people started to question whether Taylor really wanted to sell the team. Ultimately, this is how Alex Rodriguez and Marc Lore got involved in the first place. Rodriguez and Lore first met with Glen Taylor in April 2021. The negotiation process moved quickly, and an agreement to purchase the Timberwolves and the WNBA's Minnesota Lynx for $1.5 billion was finalized just 3 months later, on July 21st, 2021. The interesting part about this deal, though, is that sources with direct knowledge of the situation tell me Taylor turned down multiple cash offers at the same $1.5 billion price. Instead, he asked Rodriguez and Lore to spread their payments out over 3 years, meaning they would buy up equity tranches in 4 different payments and wouldn't officially become majority owners until 2024. Here's how the payment was structured. Option number 1 was for them to purchase a 20% stake. Option number 2 was another 20% stake. And then option number 3 was a 40% stake, giving them majority control of the team, with the 4th and final option giving them the remaining 20% stake for complete control. Taylor and his new business partners told everyone they were on the same page, and this unique structure was the best way to ease the transition of ownership. But behind closed doors, sources tell me it was the opposite. Multiple people have told me Taylor was the one who pushed for this longer process, and Rodriguez and Lore only accepted the terms because it was the only way to finalize the deal. Still, the NBA approved the sale. Rodriguez and Marc Lore wired their initial 9-figure payment, and Taylor formally introduced them as co-owners at a press conference. But that brings me to part number 2. The Timberwolves start to see a little success, while relationships start to fracture. The Minnesota Timberwolves are now one of the NBA's best teams. They finished this year's regular season with the league's 4th best record. They have a superstar in Anthony Edwards, and the team's top 4 leading scorers are all under 31 years old. This on-court success has transformed the business of the Timberwolves. Public data tells us that Minnesota's local market viewership is up 115% from last year, and privately, a source tells me the Timberwolves recently cracked $50 million in annual ticket revenue for the first time ever, and the team has gone from producing just 6 figures of gross revenue per home game last year to over $2 million in revenue for select home games this year. Now, to be fair, some of these seeds were already planted well before Rodriguez and Lore arrived. Anthony Edwards, for instance, was Minnesota's first overall pick in the 2020 NBA draft and is now considered by most to be a generational talent. However, sources tell me Rodriguez and Lore were the true driving force behind the Timberwolves hiring Tim Connelly as president of basketball operations. Rodriguez and Lore have talked about this at length in recent media appearances, but I'm told Connelly's hiring was a point of contention between the team's ownership group. For example, to convince Connelly to leave the Denver Nuggets, Rodriguez and Lore put together one of the NBA's most lucrative compensation packages. Not only did the deal include $40 million over 5 years, or $8 million annually, but sources tell me Rodriguez and Lore offered Connelly phantom equity in the Timberwolves. Phantom equity is commonly used in startups, where Marc Lore made his money, as a way to motivate key employees by aligning interests. The person receiving phantom equity doesn't actually get equity in the business, but it allows them to profit financially if the asset does well. In this case, specifically, I'm told that Connelly's potential payout was tied to the team's valuation growth under his leadership. Now, I'm told that Glen Taylor had a problem with this for 2 reasons. Number 1, Taylor thought paying Connelly $8 million annually was too much. And number 2, he also didn't want to set a precedent by giving the president of basketball operations equity in the team. In the end, sources tell me that this group settled on a compromise. Taylor let Rodriguez and Lore hire Connelly at $8 million annually, given that they were scheduled to become majority owners within 24 months. But Taylor told them they were only allowed to do that if they removed the phantom equity clause from Connelly's deal. Rodriguez and Lore agreed, and Connelly accepted the deal anyway. But while everything looked amicable on the surface, I'm told this was the start of a fractured relationship. According to sources close to the situation, there was also some disconnect with the Rudy Gobert trade, which Rodriguez and Lore have mentioned in recent interviews too. But I'm told these issues really speak to a larger problem within the organization. The business side of the building has Glen's back, while the younger generation of players has quietly been waiting for Rodriguez and Lore to take over the team. Still, despite a buildup of tension between business partners, the acquisition progressed. A source confirmed with me that Rodriguez and Lore have invested over $500 million so far as part of their 36% stake in the team. Rodriguez also frequently talks about buying a home in Minnesota, and another source tells me that Rodriguez and Lore have collectively spent more than $1 million on courtside season tickets. But this is where things get messy. With the third tranche of the acquisition set to take place last month, Taylor called off the deal. Instead of handing over majority control to Rodriguez and Lore, Taylor issued a press release saying his new partners failed to raise the necessary capital and the Timberwolves were no longer for sale. Which brings me to point number 3. Glen Taylor gets cold feet and calls off the deal. Over the last few weeks, many people have debated whether Glen Taylor has legal standing to cancel the agreement, which we'll discuss. But more importantly, through my conversations with sources, I've discovered that Taylor's cancellation of the deal was more about cold feet than it was about Rodriguez and Lore not having the money. For example, it's no secret that Rodriguez and Lore were raising money from the Carlyle Group to fund a portion of the third tranche, the 40% stake that would have given them majority control of the team. But the NBA denied the private equity group. I'm told the NBA denied Carlyle because they own equity in businesses that work directly with NBA players, and they were unwilling to liquidate those investments to do this specific deal. But that's really only half the story. Sources with direct knowledge of the financing process told me Rodriguez and Lore had Dial Capital Partners ready to go as a backup plan. The terms weren't as good. One example of this is that Rodriguez was reportedly trying to sell shares at a higher price than the 2021 valuation and pocket the difference. But Dial Capital Partners already owns several minority stakes across the NBA and was seen as a safe backup plan because the firm is already a pre-approved NBA investment partner. So they closed the deal with Dial and sent the paperwork to the NBA. The NBA still needed to interview some of the group's limited partners, like Eric Schmidt, the former CEO of Google, but a source tells me Rodriguez and Lore felt they were in the clear, presumably because their lawyers advised them that the agreement automatically extended an additional 90 days if the deal was under NBA review at expiration. However, multiple other sources have told me they believe Glen Taylor was always going to pull something like this. Specifically, they pointed to 2 examples of mistrust. First, the Timberwolves currently have about a dozen limited partners. These are minority shareholders, most of whom bought in at a low price and have been looking for liquidity for years. However, rather than letting those limited partners sell their equity stakes early on in the process, I'm told the 36% stake that Rodriguez and Lore purchased came entirely from Taylor's existing 70% ownership stake in the team. That means that after 2 years and a $500 million investment from Rodriguez and Lore, Glen Taylor was the team's only shareholder to take money off the table. The team's second largest shareholder, a real estate developer named Meyer Orbach, actually sued Taylor for doing this. And while making someone wait years to receive the money is obviously not ideal, it goes even deeper. Sources tell me Taylor exclusively sold his shares because there was only a 4% price escalator in the original agreement, meaning not only did these LPs not get their money out at a $1.5 billion valuation in 2021, but they're now earning just 4% annually on that locked up money. That leads me to the second example, which is potentially more concerning. Sources close to the situation tell me that since Taylor sold his personal equity to Rodriguez and Lore, rather than LP equity. His ownership stake in the team actually fell below Rodriguez and Lore for a point of time, about 34% for Taylor to 36% for Rodriguez and Lore. But rather than letting this happen, which was going to happen anyway during the next acquisition payment, sources said Taylor quietly purchased a small equity stake from an existing limited partner. I'm told that the limited partner was Bill Sexton, and his 2.96% equity stake, combined with Taylor's existing 34% stake, put the current Timberwolves owner back in front of Rodriguez and Lore, 37% ownership to 36% ownership. The obvious question is, why would Taylor do that? Except there really isn't a good answer, unless we have to assume he never intended to follow through on the deal anyway. All right, let's talk about part number 4, mediation, arbitration, and then what? It inevitably feels like this arrangement is headed towards a lengthy legal process. For starters, Glen Taylor has dug his feet into the ground, repeatedly saying over the last few weeks that he believes he has legal standing to terminate the agreement. And Rodriguez and Lore aren't going down without a fight, as they stand to make billions on this deal, with the team's valuation roughly doubling from $1.5 billion in 2021 to about $3 billion today. Sources close to the situation tell me the agreement outlines a clear process. First, the argument will be heard privately by a mediator. Then, if that doesn't work, it will head to a 3-person arbitration committee, with one person picked by Taylor, another picked by Rodriguez and Lore, and the third mutually agreed upon by the other 2 people. If that doesn't solve the issue, then the argument will head to court. Sources tell me that Taylor feels like he has an advantage in this situation, as it would be on his home turf in Minnesota, a state where, remember, he previously served as senator and has lived his entire life. Interestingly enough, the actual equity purchase agreement between Taylor and Rodriguez and Lore was made public through the lawsuit I previously mentioned between Taylor and Meyer Orbach, an existing Minnesota Timberwolves LP. I wasn't able to get an opinion from any of the lawyers who worked on this specific agreement, but I ran it by several sources who have worked on dozens of sports transactions, and the overwhelming opinion is that, unless there is something we don't know, Rodriguez and Lore should be entitled to the 90-day extension. However, there are several other things we need to consider. The 4% price escalator, for instance, means that the longer this draws out, the worse it gets for Minnesota's limited partners. That's because if Rodriguez and Lore end up assuming control of the team 12 to 24 months from now, or maybe even longer, these LPs would have had their money locked up even longer than they previously anticipated, and no additional interest to show for it. Furthermore, sources confirm with me that Tim Connelly's deal includes an opt-out clause after this season, a detail that was first reported by Shams Charania. So, knowing Taylor could continue to own the team long-term and didn't want him in the first place, it's certainly logical to speculate as to whether Connelly might exercise that option and leave the Timberwolves to join another NBA team, many of which would obviously love to have him. I also wouldn't expect Rodriguez or Lore to stay on as limited partners if this doesn't go their way. The easiest way to explain this dilemma is that limited partners typically receive a 30 to 40% discount on these investments because LP stakes don't have any control or liquidity. So an example might be someone paying $60 million for a 10% stake in a team valued at $1 billion, rather than paying $100 million for the same stake. This typically isn't a huge deal. As I said, the investor is being compensated with a discount for their lack of control and liquidity. But in Rodriguez and Lore's case, it makes a substantial difference, as their 36% equity stake was acquired at a premium rather than a discount, because the expectation was that it would lead to majority control. So don't be surprised if things get ugly. Someone has already leaked a document to NBA insider Adrian Wojnarowski, claiming Taylor got nervous that Rodriguez and Lore were going to blow up a championship contending team because they submitted a financial plan to the NBA that placed the franchise under the luxury tax threshold. Wojnarowski said, after decades of futility, the Timberwolves are the West's top seed, and Lore and Rodriguez's cost-cutting projections were among the concerns that led Taylor to void a contract that would have finalized the sale of the Timberwolves. Now, my sources were able to confirm that this is true. Rodriguez and Lore did submit a projection that put them under the salary cap next season. However, I'm also told that this is relatively normal, with many owners choosing to submit lower projections only to revise them at a later date once they see if the team is competitive or not in the playoffs. I also think it's worth noting that Taylor has changed his story multiple times at this point. At first, it was that Rodriguez and Lore didn't have the money. Then, after several outlets, including The Athletic, reviewed financial documentation proving they submitted a fully capitalized offer to the NBA, the league's top insider insinuated they were cheap. So, are they too flashy for spending $40 million on an executive and $10 million on an in-arena owner suite? Or are they too cheap for submitting a financial projection that would have put the Timberwolves under the luxury tax threshold next season? Maybe it's both, but you could see why these stories start to contradict each other. In fact, Taylor basically admitted this dispute wasn't about money, telling The Athletic a few weeks ago, "We've built this team. We've got the players now. It appears to me that we should have a very positive run for a number of years, and I want to be part of that." That's why sources close to the situation feel confident this will eventually end with Rodriguez and Lore taking over the team. The legal process still needs to play out, which is somewhat of an unknown, and it may not happen tomorrow, a month from now, or even a year from now. But everyone I talk to seems to be operating under the impression that Taylor will string this battle out for as long as he possibly can. Again, Taylor is 83 years old. He's currently overseeing the best Timberwolves team he's had in decades, and he doesn't intend to give that up without a fight, whether fair or foul. However, from everything I've gathered, it may not be his choice. Legal experts say the contract is ironclad. His limited partners are getting more upset every day this drags out, and it appears Taylor's undermined the agreement from day one. But even his best efforts won't let him void a signed contract just because the team got better. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe to the channel. I release weekly videos like this breaking down the business and money behind sports.